When King's Landing fell and the bells tolled not in celebration but in chaos and conquest, the proud lineage of House Targaryen came to a brutal and humiliating end. The dragon banners were torn down, the royal family slaughtered or scattered, and the Iron Throne, once the symbol of their dominion over Westeros, was seized by Robert Baratheon, a usurper with a warhammer and a vendetta. In the ashes of that downfall, a child prince was spirited away across the narrow sea. His name was Viserys Targaryen. Only 8 years old when his father, the Mad King Aerys II, was killed by Jaime Lannister, Viserys watched his world crumble in a blaze of treachery. His older brother Rhaegar had already died on the Trident, cut down by Robert himself. His mother, Queen Rhaella, fled to Dragonstone with him and gave birth to Daenerys amidst a storm that shattered the skies and heralded the fall of the dynasty. But even Dragonstone was no sanctuary. The forces of the new regime pressed close. With danger imminent, loyalists smuggled the last Targaryens away, placing them on a ship bound for Essos. What followed for Viserys was not the life of a prince, but a meandering exile that eroded his pride and tested his sanity. He moved from Braavos to Myr to Lys and beyond, hosted by those who were intrigued by his name but unwilling to support his claim. The memory of his family's rule faded into myth, and Viserys became an echo of power past. He had no court, no army, no gold, only a story. A tale he told again and again to merchants and mercenaries, of dragons that once ruled the skies, of a bloodline ordained by gods, of a throne stolen from its rightful heir. But for all his hardship, Viserys never let go of the belief that the Iron Throne was his by divine right. He spoke often of his destiny, of the day he would return and cast down the usurpers. He taught his sister Daenerys, barely more than a babe when they fled, that they were not beggars, but royalty in disguise. He made her repeat the names of their ancestors, Aegon the Conqueror, Maegor the Cruel, Jaehaerys the Wise, until they were etched in her bones. Viserys wrapped himself in the history of House Targaryen like armor, blind to how rusted and dented it had become. There is tragedy in this, because Viserys was not born a monster. He was born into trauma, his childhood carved out by the violent end of a kingdom. He witnessed firsthand the collapse of everything he was told to value: power, legacy, divine right. His upbringing was not one of mentorship or strategy, but of flight, fear, and resentment. He grew not in a castle surrounded by advisors, but in foreign cities, where he was pitied or ignored. Every kindness was laced with condescension. Every shelter was temporary. The free cities of Essos, while cosmopolitan and wealthy, were not built to cradle exiled kings. Viserys was constantly reminded of what he lacked. He could not command armies as his ancestors did. He could not summon dragons to burn away his enemies. He was a relic, preserved by loyalists who didn't know what else to do with him. And so, in the absence of a real crown, he wore the crown of memory. The idea of the throne became more than a political goal, it became his identity. Without it, he was nothing. This obsession calcified over time. As Daenerys grew older, she became a vessel for his dreams. He viewed her not as a person with her own mind and future, but as a tool. Her beauty, her blood, her femininity, all were assets he could trade, manipulate, or exploit to regain what he had lost. He arranged her marriage to Khal Drogo not out of brotherly love or political wisdom, but because he believed the Dothraki could give him the army he needed to reclaim Westeros. He didn't ask her, he demanded. Because in his eyes, she owed him. The world owed him. And yet, despite his harshness, there were cracks in the armor. Viserys had moments of vulnerability. When he spoke of the Red Keep, it was with the aching detail of someone who missed not just power, but home. He remembered the tapestries, the dragon skulls, the taste of Dornish wine. These memories sustained him, but also imprisoned him. He was frozen in time, reliving a past that had been violently severed. While the world moved on, he remained a child of war, forever waiting for the restoration that would never come. He believed Westeros would welcome him back. He imagined the small folk rising in rebellion the moment he set foot on the shores of Dragonstone. He envisioned the noble houses throwing down their banners in the name of the dragon. But Viserys misunderstood the world he had lost. He didn't see how the people viewed the Targaryens not as rightful rulers, but as mad tyrants. He didn't understand that Robert's rebellion, for all its bloodshed, had given many lords and knights the stability they craved. He thought his name was a promise. In truth, it was a warning. His nickname, the Beggar King, haunted him. He despised it, but it was not unearned. Viserys begged, yes, but not just for food or gold. He begged to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be feared. He raised his voice because no one listened. He lashed out because no one obeyed. He imagined himself a dragon, but he had no fire. And that, perhaps, is the most painful irony. Born of a line that once commanded the skies, Viserys could barely command a dinner table. The blood of the dragon flowed through his veins, but it brought him no heat, no strength, no awe. Only desperation. And yet, the world might have been different had he chosen another path. Had he embraced humility, forged alliances, and tempered his pride, Viserys might have become a figure of sympathy or even unity. His exile could have been a rallying cry. His tragedy could have softened his edges. But he believed that power should return to him simply because of who he was. He mistook history for inevitability, legacy for legitimacy. As Daenerys grew into her own strength, into her own vision of leadership, she began to see what her brother could not. That loyalty must be earned. That fear without respect is hollow. That blood is not enough. Viserys could not understand this shift, and it terrified him. He clung tighter to his illusions, even as his sister slipped out from under his control. In the end, it was not Robert Baratheon who destroyed Viserys, nor any knight of Westeros. It was his own failure to evolve, his own refusal to see the world as it was. When he met his end at the hands of Khal Drogo, it was both cruel and symbolic. The man who had spent his life demanding a crown was given one of molten gold, scalding and silent. He died not as a king, but as a warning, a reminder that lineage without wisdom is a curse, that obsession without self-awareness is a path to ruin. Viserys Targaryen was the last prince of a dying dynasty. But more than that, he was a mirror held up to the past, reflecting all the arrogance, entitlement, and decay that had led to the Targaryens' downfall. He was not a villain in the traditional sense. He was a boy raised on ashes, molded by trauma, and consumed by a hunger he never learned to control. In the end, he was not slain by enemies, but by the weight of a crown he never truly understood. The tragedy of Viserys Targaryen was not simply that he lost a kingdom, it was that he was never truly fit to rule one. While his exile and the fall of his house shaped the conditions of his life, the greatest obstacle to his return was not external forces, but internal flaws. His arrogance, his volatility, and his blind entitlement didn't just undermine his claim to the Iron Throne, they destroyed any chance he had of earning it. Viserys believed that blood alone entitled him to rule, but in doing so, he ignored the qualities that truly define leadership: empathy, resilience, wisdom, and the ability to inspire. Viserys was a man of brittle pride. He could recite the names of his ancestors with reverence, invoke the might of old Illyrio, and speak passionately of the Iron Throne as his birthright. But he did not know how to lead men, command loyalty, or navigate the intricacies of politics. Every slight, real or imagined, became a personal insult. Every delay in his imagined restoration was treated as a betrayal. Instead of cultivating alliances or winning hearts, he demanded obedience. Instead of earning respect, he coerced and manipulated. His title was his crutch, not his compass. Perhaps the most damning flaw in Viserys' character was his insecurity. He wielded his status like a sword, threatening anyone who doubted him, often resorting to cruelty when his authority was questioned. But behind every outburst was fear, a gnawing anxiety that the world no longer believed in him. He sensed that others saw through the thin veil of his grandeur, and he lashed out to mask his powerlessness. He mistook fear for strength, volume for authority, and bloodline for destiny. This insecurity fed into a cycle of volatility. Viserys was unpredictable, boiling with rage one moment, groveling the next. He was incapable of controlling his emotions, let alone leading others through turmoil. His volatility alienated even those closest to him. Daenerys, the sister he raised and claimed to protect, increasingly found herself frightened by his instability. Servants and hosts learned to tiptoe around him, not out of respect, but out of fear of his wrath. He mistook silence for loyalty, never realizing it was driven by dread. Unlike leaders who rise through adversity, Viserys was broken by it. He allowed his suffering to curdle into resentment. Every kindness he received in exile was seen as pity. Every favor was never enough. He carried himself as though the world owed him restitution, yet he did nothing to inspire that belief in others. He offered no vision for Westeros, no promise of justice or renewal. His claim was rooted solely in the past, a past filled with dragons and domination, not peace or progress. This backward-looking obsession rendered him incapable of adapting to the present. Viserys never understood that Westeros had changed. The lords of the realm were not pining for the return of Targaryen rule. The common folk did not rise in rebellion at the whisper of his name. The dragons were dead, and so too was the unchallenged legacy of his house. But Viserys clung to the illusion of inevitability. He believed that his return would be greeted with trumpets and cheers, simply because of who he was. He failed to see that titles mean nothing without the ability to wield them. There was also a cruel irony in his reliance on Daenerys. While she grew stronger and wiser with each passing day, learning to inspire loyalty and command power, Viserys regressed. He became more controlling, more erratic, and more desperate. He treated her as property, his to sell, his to sacrifice for his goals. But unlike Viserys, Daenerys learned. She absorbed the lessons of hardship. She gained the respect of others through courage, vision, and compassion. In time, she became everything Viserys pretended to be. It is easy to view Viserys as a villain, but he is better understood as a cautionary figure, a man who mistook legacy for leadership and authority for virtue. He was shaped by grief but chose bitterness over healing. He suffered loss but turned it outward in cruelty, and when given opportunities to grow, he recoiled into pride. His greatest enemy was not Robert Baratheon or any rival across the sea, it was himself. The molten crown given to him by Khal Drogo was not just a brutal execution, it was a darkly poetic end. He was granted the crown he so desperately demanded, but in a form that revealed the hollowness of his pursuit. Gold melted down and poured upon his head, shiny, regal, but deadly, was the perfect symbol of Viserys. All show, no substance. In death, he became a grim parable about the dangers of unearned power and unchecked ego. Viserys could have been so much more. Had he looked to the future instead of clinging to the past, had he led with empathy instead of entitlement, had he seen Daenerys as a partner rather than a pawn, his story might have ended differently. He might have become a voice for restoration, a symbol of redemption, a prince who earned his people's love, but his flaws defined him and ultimately destroyed him. Viserys Targaryen was the problem at the heart of his own destiny, not the exiled prince who might have reclaimed the throne, but the broken man who lost it long before he ever had the chance. Viserys Targaryen was a man driven by a singular obsession, reclaiming the Iron Throne. The son of the Mad King Aerys II, he grew up in exile, stripped of his birthright and haunted by the fall of his house. But what if Viserys had taken a different path? What if, instead of demanding the crown as if the world owed it to him, he had learned the art of leadership, diplomacy, and compassion? What if he had sought to win hearts, not dominate through fear? Imagine Viserys in the free cities, recognizing that he had no power to compel loyalty and no armies to enforce his will. Rather than speaking of the Iron Throne as his by birth and threatening anyone who questioned it, he starts small. He begins to listen to the merchants, the sellswords, the refugees, those who knew the cost of war and longed for stability. Instead of insults, he offers conversation. Instead of rage, he offers vision. He spends time among the common people of Pentos and beyond, not hiding behind Illyrio Mopatis' generosity, but walking the markets, hearing the grievances of the displaced Westerosi, and offering empathy. He helps with food shortages, mediates disputes, and funds repairs of war-torn enclaves, using Illyrio's resources wisely. Slowly, he builds a reputation not as the beggar king, but as a prince of the people. Stories begin to spread. The silver-haired Targaryen who sits among the poor and speaks of a better world. Illyrio, recognizing the new Viserys' appeal, doubles down on his support, not simply for politics, but because Viserys is gaining influence. Local captains, sellsword commanders, and minor lords in exile take notice. Here is a man not just claiming a throne, but someone who might be worthy of it. The exiled Westerosi nobility, who once dismissed him as arrogant and unhinged, begin to see a leader. He no longer refers to his sister Daenerys as a pawn to be traded. Instead, he includes her in every discussion. They train together, read history together. He tells her stories of their house not in bitterness, but with reverence for what was once noble and just. He teaches her the Targaryen words, fire and blood, as a legacy not of terror, but of transformation. She begins to love her brother, not out of fear, but respect. In turn, she begins to grow strong beside him, a partner in the restoration of their house rather than its hostage. When Drogo's khalasar comes into view, Viserys does not demand his sister be sold like chattel. Instead, he approaches the Dothraki with cultural respect. He learns their customs. He rides with them. He presents gifts to their wise women and seeks counsel with the Blood Riders. He earns their attention not through dominance but through honor. When Daenerys is eventually wed to Drogo, it is not a sale, it is an alliance, a joining of traditions. Viserys earns the right to ride beside his sister in the khalasar. He does not demand a crown from Drogo. Instead, he listens, observes, and begins to understand the Dothraki way. He speaks to Drogo of uniting two worlds, of bringing the strength of the Horse Lords across the narrow sea, not in chains, but in glory. His humility intrigues them, his passion inspires them. And slowly, the idea of a foreign king leading them becomes less laughable. With his growing influence among the Dothraki and the free cities, Viserys begins to write letters to houses in Westeros that are quietly disillusioned with Robert Baratheon's rule. He frames his campaign not as a return of dragonfire and death, but of rightful rule, of justice, of an end to chaos. He points to the crown's mounting debts, to the squabbling of the small council, to the negligence of the realm. He speaks of a new Westeros, one ruled by a king who walked with the lowborn, who rose from exile with empathy and strength. Some in Westeros begin to whisper of Viserys Stormborn not as a madman's son, but as a king forged by hardship. Discontented lords in the Stormlands and Reach begin to weigh their options. Spy masters in King's Landing take notice. The realm, so long secure under Robert, begins to show cracks. And Viserys? He does not press for immediate war. He builds relationships. He sends emissaries. He waits. As Daenerys becomes Khaleesi in her own right, she and Viserys travel together through the lands beyond the Red Waste, forging bonds, rescuing slaves, and gathering stories. They hear tales of Rhaegar of the Prince who sang songs and died for love, and they shape themselves in that image, regal, noble, and beloved. The legacy of their family is no longer defined by madness. It is reborn in their shared actions. When Viserys finally does cross the narrow sea, it is not with desperation and a handful of sellswords. It is with a coalition, a mixed host of Dothraki warriors, Essosi knights, freedmen, and lords in exile. He lands not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. His banner is not draped in blood, but in hope. The people of the Stormlands rally to him, tired of Robert's drunken hunts and absentee rule. When he takes his first castle, he holds court with mercy and fairness. He forgives the small folk who fought against him. He offers peace to those who bend the knee. News spreads. House after house begins to consider where their loyalty lies. The realm sees a Targaryen who is not mad, not cruel, but something else entirely, wise. But challenges arise. Whispers of his lineage are used against him. Robert, now aware of the threat, sends assassins. Jon Arryn dies. triggering political tremors across the capital. But Viserys is prepared. He has allies in place. Varys and Illyrio coordinate from within. The spider spins his web in favor of the dragon. Ned Stark, torn between loyalty to Robert and honor, begins to consider the words of the past. He remembers Rhaegar not as a kidnapper, but as a tragic prince. He learns that Viserys is not the brat once rumored in exile, but a man of calm and purpose. When Robert dies and the throne teeters, Viserys steps forward not with fire and fury, but with a letter to the realm, a promise of peace, of restoration, of prosperity. He enters King's Landing not on dragon wings, not amidst ruin, but on foot through the gates, welcomed by crowds of starving citizens who have heard his name and believe in it. There is no need for wildfire, no need for the Red Keep to burn, no need for madness. In this world, Viserys has rewritten the Targaryen legacy. He has shown that the blood of the dragon can warm rather than burn. He wears his crown not as a weapon, but as a symbol. And the Iron Throne, cold and cruel, is softened under the weight of a king who learned to win hearts, not demand crowns. Viserys Targaryen stood on foreign soil, a prince without a kingdom, a king without a crown. Yet the world of Essos was not without opportunity. It was a land of city-states, mercenary companies, and power for hire if only he knew how to wield diplomacy instead of pride. Unlike the Seven Kingdoms, where his name had faded into myth or ridicule, Essos had little care for ancient Westerosi bloodlines. Influence here came through coin, reputation, and strength. And so Viserys began to rethink everything. He looked around at the free cities, each with its own hierarchy, ambitions, and internal struggles. Lys, with its seductive politics and perfumed assassins. Myr, with its endless mercantile rivalries. Tyrosh, where petty wars were bought and sold. And Volantis, whose black walls housed one of the oldest oligarchies in the known world. Rather than scorn these places for their decadence, Viserys learned from them. He spent time understanding their politics, mastering their languages, observing their conflicts. Rather than move as a beggar prince, he moved as a diplomat. He did not ask the magisters for gold or armies as a matter of entitlement. Instead, he offered them something in return. Trade routes re-established when he took the throne. The possibility of future taxes reduced for Essosi merchants in Westerosi ports. A promise of favorable terms for free city interests once House Targaryen ruled again. Slowly, certain merchant princes began to see Viserys not as a liability, but as an investment. In Braavos, he met with bankers not to beg for coin, but to present a long-term plan. He spoke of Westeros as a fractured realm, led by a gluttonous king with no fiscal foresight. He argued that stability and prosperity in the West depended on responsible leadership, and that House Targaryen, under his guidance, could bring that. He presented maps, merchant manifests, population data. He explained the economic advantage of backing a claimant who would stabilize ports from Dorne to the Vale. The Iron Bank did not smile, but they listened. Then came the sellsword companies, the Second Sons, the Stormcrows, the Company of the Cat, the Golden Company, perhaps the most renowned of all. These were not rabble, they were disciplined, often composed of disinherited sons and ambitious captains. Viserys did not speak down to them. He offered them what they truly wanted, a future. Not just gold, but glory. Not just plunder, but purpose. He met with captains in smoky tents, lit by low-burning braziers. He dined with sellsword lieutenants in the corner taverns of Qohor and Norvos. He told them of Westeros not as a land to pillage, but as a broken realm waiting for leadership. He promised them titles, land, noble names if they helped him win back the crown. Some laughed at first, but he persisted. He trained with them, drank with them, told stories around the fire. Slowly, their laughter gave way to interest. Viserys began to build his own circle. A former Myrish banker, disillusioned with corruption, joined as a financial steward. A disfavored Tyroshi noblewoman with a talent for logistics came on as his supply strategist. A Braavosi swordmaster, old and grizzled, became his trainer and guard captain. A charismatic ex-Stormcrow named Merrick Blacksteel became his first battlefield commander. Each had something to gain. Each had no throne, no title, and nothing to lose. Under Viserys, they had hope. When rumors of dragons spread from the east, he paid attention. If Dragonfire had truly returned to the world through Daenerys, then perhaps it was time to reunite with her, not as a master reclaiming his pawn, but as a brother standing beside a queen. He sent emissaries, ones she could trust. Not demands, but letters of apology, filled with honesty and intent. He told her of his growth, of the allies he had gathered, of the army he was forming. He asked not for obedience, but for unity. Meanwhile, the slavers of Astapor and Yunkai saw his rise with suspicion. They remembered the silver-haired girl who had razed their cities and freed their slaves. But Viserys offered a different path. He promised not to burn, but to build. He met with them quietly, not to seek their friendship, but to prevent their interference. Some were bought off, others neutralized through diplomacy or exposure. Where Daenerys ruled through liberation and fire, Viserys ruled through compromise and leverage. Eventually, his growing force became more than a rumor. The Golden Company agreed to lend its strength, not out of loyalty to his name, but out of belief in his plan. They saw in him a Targaryen with strategy, restraint, and the patience to actually take and hold a kingdom. Their elephants marched behind his banners, their gold-funded campaigns, their agents sowed discord in Westeros, softening targets before his arrival. Essos nobles began to host him. He was invited to the courts of Volantene triarchs and Lazarene priest kings. They spoke of commerce, of gods, of the tides of history. Viserys did not dominate these conversations, he absorbed them. He adapted his image to fit what each group needed to see. To the devout, he was a deliverer. To the pragmatic, he was a profitable venture. To the exiles, he was one of them. With every passing month, his coalition grew. Former slaves joined his cause, hearing that the Targaryens once ruled with both fear and justice. Sellsword companies respected his discipline and ability to pay. City-states tolerated or even endorsed his movement, if only to avoid being left behind in the next era of Westerosi trade. He moved across Essos not with fire, but with force measured, intentional, and growing stronger by the day. His sister, now ruling in Meereen, finally agreed to meet. It was not a reunion of desperation or betrayal. It was a summit. Two leaders, two halves of a lost dynasty. She saw the difference in him. The cruelty was gone. The desperation had hardened into resolve. They spoke not of ancient blood rights, but of governance, justice, and the future. Together, they began to plan not a rampage through Westeros, but a calculated return. A campaign that united freedmen, sellswords, nobles, and dragons. Viserys forged alliances not with arrogance, but with clarity. Not with fire, but with foresight. In doing so, he became something else entirely. Not just a Targaryen reborn, but a ruler ready. Illyrio Mopatis was not a man given to sentiment. A merchant prince of Pentos, he amassed his power through trade, subterfuge, and the strategic use of influence. He housed Viserys and Daenerys, not out of loyalty to House Targaryen, but because he saw potential. Viserys, however, never looked beneath the surface. He saw Illyrio's hospitality as obligation. He mistook indulgence for allegiance. In doing so, he squandered an opportunity that could have changed the trajectory of his life, and possibly the future of Westeros. Now imagine a different Viserys, one who understands the rules of the game. From the beginning, he views Illyrio not as a servant of his cause, but as a partner. He recognizes the merchant's wealth, influence, and network across Essos. Rather than demand ships and soldiers, Viserys asks questions. He studies the source of Illyrio's power, his connections to the magisters of Pentos, the spice and slave trades, and most notably, his secret alliances with the Golden Company and House Blackfire loyalists. He listens instead of commands, learns instead of presumes. He refrains from outbursts. He controls his temper, recognizing that every display of entitlement is another reason for Illyrio to treat him as a pawn rather than a player. He begins to see himself not just as a king in exile, but as someone in need of building a foundation from nothing. Instead of berating Daenerys and acting rashly, he includes her in every meeting. Together, they present a united front, a brother and sister bound by purpose, not just blood. Viserys proposes a formal agreement with Illyrio, a long-term strategic partnership. In exchange for Illyrio's continued financial support, Viserys offers more than promises of future reward. He provides actionable leverage, exclusive trading rights in Westeros' ports once the crown is reclaimed, control over key tariffs along the Narrow Sea, a written declaration ensuring that House Mopatis would be elevated to noble status in Westeros. This is no longer the ramblings of a desperate prince, it's a calculated pitch from a man thinking beyond his crown. Intrigued by this new attitude, Illyrio offers more than wine and whispers. He opens his private network to Viserys, access to smuggling operations, information couriers, and disaffected Westerosi lords still harboring resentment against Robert Baratheon. Together, they map out a list of potential supporters, House Harlaw in the Iron Islands perhaps, or vassals of Dorne who still feel the loss of Elia Martell. They plant seeds of rebellion years before they plan to set sail. Viserys becomes a student of politics. Illyrio arranges for him to be mentored by former diplomats, retired captains, and court scholars who fled Westeros after Robert's rebellion. He studies the mistakes of his father, the charisma of Rhaegar, and the brutality of Tywin Lannister. He learns how to write persuasive letters to lords who have never met him. He learns how to stay silent when needed, how to make others speak first. As part of the partnership, Illyrio arranges for Viserys to attend gatherings with other powerful Pentoshi and Volantene elites. These are not courtly balls, they are dinners where trade deals are discussed, wars are quietly funded, and alliances are negotiated in candlelit corners. Viserys doesn't overplay his hand. He presents himself not as a king demanding allegiance, but as an opportunity, a return to profitable business in Westeros under stable, Targaryen-friendly rule. Illyrio, now genuinely invested in Viserys' rise, introduces him to the captains of sellsword companies, mercenaries, whose loyalty is tied not just to coin, but to the hope of real reward. He convinces the lesser members of the Golden Company to meet with Viserys in secret. Viserys, prepared and eloquent, makes a pitch. He doesn't lean on his name alone, he speaks of the cause, of the land that could be theirs, of the legacy they could build. For the first time, a Targaryen speaks to them not like a prince from a dead dynasty, but like a commander in the making. This version of Viserys keeps Daenerys close, not hidden away. They appear together at feasts and strategy meetings. She becomes known among Illyrio's guests not just as a quiet girl, but as the silver-haired diplomat beside her brother. The bond between them strengthens. He defends her from manipulation, and she, in turn, becomes his most trusted voice. Her instincts serve as a check on his ambition. Their alliance grows into a mutual respect, mirroring what Daenerys would one day have with Jorah Mormont, but rooted in family rather than servitude. When it comes time to court Khal Drogo, Illyrio suggests the idea not as a transaction, but as a power move. Viserys doesn't rage at the thought of Daenerys marrying a barbarian. Instead, he approaches the union with strategy. He seeks to understand Dothraki culture, learns key phrases, and even offers gifts to Drogo's bloodriders. Daenerys is given real choice in the matter. Her consent solidifies the deal. Khal Drogo does not see a desperate brother selling off his sister, but a leader offering alliance through marriage, backed by a powerful Essosi coalition. And when the marriage occurs, Viserys remains in Illyrio's good graces. He doesn't alienate Drogo by demanding armies and threatening crowns. Instead, he takes Illyrio's advice and waits. He continues working with Illyrio's network spies in Westeros, trade ships in the Stepstones, emissaries sent quietly to Dorne and the Stormlands. His reach expands while he remains in the shadows. Illyrio, seeing Viserys mature, commits even more resources. He uses his connections to help Viserys slowly gather ships. He invests in grain, armor, weapons, all stockpiled quietly under the guise of trade. Viserys, now patient, refrains from declaring war. He understands the need to win through timing, not tantrums. And when Daenerys hatches her dragons, Viserys is not a bitter, broken man left in the dust of her destiny. He is already at her side with political infrastructure, financial backing, and a military foundation. Rather than steal her moment, he reinforces it. He helps her see the dragons not just as weapons, but as leverage. Together, they strategize. One leads through fire, the other through deals inked in shadow. Viserys, reborn through restraint, becomes the second pillar of the Targaryen restoration, not its doomed prelude. His alliance with Illyrio proves to be the bedrock upon which a return to Westeros is not only possible, but inevitable. The Dothraki were feared across Essos, nomadic horse lords, ruthless in battle and proud of their traditions. Viserys Targaryen saw them only as a means to an end, brutes to be used, tools to be discarded once the Iron Throne was his. He insulted their customs, disrespected their leaders, and treated their people with disdain. In the end, he died not by war or poison, but by the very fire he failed to understand. But what if he had approached them differently? What if Viserys, instead of clinging to his birthright like a child grasping a broken toy, had opened his eyes and seen the Dothraki not as savages, but as potential allies, perhaps even as equals? What if he had recognized that the key to regaining the Iron Throne lay not in bending others to his will, but in learning to ride with them? It begins with restraint. When Illyrio suggests a marriage alliance between Daenerys and Khal Drogo, Viserys does not explode in arrogance. Instead, he pauses. He asks questions. He studies the Dothraki, their ways, their taboos, their honor codes. He learns that strength is respected, but wisdom is revered. That bravery on horseback means more than bloodlines. That gifts and oaths mean everything, and that empty promises mean nothing. Viserys prepares himself before ever meeting Drogo. He sheds his silk for leather. He learns the basics of horseback riding, not to impress, but to avoid humiliation. He speaks with Dothraki emissaries in respectful tones. He studies their language, even if only enough to exchange greetings without embarrassment. When the moment comes, and he stands before Khal Drogo, he bows not too low, not in submission, but in recognition of the Khal's authority. At the wedding, he doesn't sulk or fume. He watches, he learns, he speaks when spoken to. He praises Drogo's warriors, shares wine with the Blood Riders, and offers them gifts. Finely forged Westerosi steel, rare spices from Illyrio's vaults, embroidered horse blankets. Small acts of respect begin to open doors. Dothraki warriors who would have mocked him as a cart king begin to view him with curiosity. More importantly, Viserys lets Daenerys thrive. He does not control her, abuse her, or treat her like property. He sees the bond between her and Drogo forming, and instead of interfering, he supports it. He encourages her to speak the Dothraki tongue, to wear their clothes, to ride beside her husband. As she rises in esteem within the Khalasar, Viserys gains reflected honor. He becomes the Khalaka's blood-protected, respected, part of the inner circle. Rather than pester Drogo for armies, Viserys becomes his student. He asks to ride with the Khalasar. He begins training in their combat style, learning to fight from horseback, wielding the Arak. He sweats, bleeds, and earns bruises, things he once believed beneath a king. But the Dothraki notice. They respect effort. A prince willing to learn their ways becomes a prince worth following. Around campfires under the stars, Viserys shares stories of Westeros, not of thrones and titles, but of great battles, noble houses, and lands across the sea filled with stone towers and armored foes. The Dothraki, fascinated by tales of conquest, begin to see the faraway land not as myth, but as challenge. Viserys does not speak of commanding them to Westeros. He speaks of inviting them to ride with him, to take a world that has never seen their kind. He speaks not as a master, but as a visionary. Through Daenerys, who now commands great influence in the Khalasar, Viserys earns the trust of Drogo. Instead of pressing the Khal for war, he proposes gradual steps. He suggests forming alliances with other Khalasars, uniting them not through force, but through shared purpose. He helps broker trade between Drogo's people and Illyrio's merchants, exchanging weapons, grain, and armor. The Dothraki see wealth flowing, prestige rising, and they begin to see Viserys not as a beggar, but as a catalyst. When Viserys visits Vaes Dothrak, he treats it with reverence. He honors the Mother of Mountains, brings offerings to the Dosh Khaleen, and refrains from drawing blades in the sacred city. The old crones observe him with suspicion, but also with interest. He is not the first foreigner to court the Dothraki, but he is the first to truly listen. As time passes, Viserys gains followers of his own within the Khalasar. Young riders, impressed by his adaptability, begin to ride under his banner. A former Westerosi sellsword becomes his bodyguard. A Dothraki warrior, once skeptical, pledges loyalty after watching Viserys save a child during a raid on a rival tribe. These are not soldiers bought with gold, they are comrades earned through shared blood and dust. With the foundation laid, Viserys begins to speak of Westeros with intention. He gathers Drogo and his blood riders, laying out a strategy. First, securing ships through Illyrio's contacts, then uniting with other sellsword companies already loyal to House Targaryen. Finally, crossing the narrow sea not as invaders, but as liberators with dragons, if Daenerys' dreams are true, and with the most fearsome cavalry in the world. Instead of demanding a golden crown, Viserys wins the Dothraki's war cries. He becomes not just a prince, he becomes a brother to the horse lords. His silver hair is no longer seen as weakness, but as a mark of prophecy. His leadership style, blending Targaryen vision with Dothraki ferocity, forms something new. A fusion of East and West, fire and hoof. When the invasion begins, it is not a desperate charge of scattered mercenaries. It is a unified force. Dothraki Khalasars thundering across the sea with discipline, bolstered by Illyrio's wealth and the backing of Free City allies. Viserys commands alongside Drogo. Daenerys rides with the dragons. Their armies storm Westeros not with reckless fire, but with overwhelming speed, coordination, and surprise. The lords of Westeros are not prepared for such a force. They expect dragons or spies, not tens of thousands of mounted warriors backed by Essos gold and Targaryen loyalty. Cities fall without bloodshed. Riverlands lords remember their ties to House Targaryen. Small folk, tired of taxation and war, cheer for the silver banner. And Viserys? He walks the halls of Dragonstone not as the petty, broken man of old, but as a hardened, humbled, and battle-tested leader scarred by the deserts of Essos, tempered by the fire of the Dothraki, and finally worthy of the throne he once demanded without merit. In this version of the tale, the last dragon did not burn too soon. He rode, he learned, and in doing so, he led. Viserys Targaryen believed the world owed him a throne. Daenerys Targaryen only ever wanted a family. Their tragedy began not just with war and exile, but with a broken relationship rooted in dominance, fear, and unmet needs. Viserys saw his sister as a tool, a bargaining chip to regain his crown. He never recognized the ally standing beside him, only the asset he could trade. In clinging to control, he lost everything. But imagine a different bond. Viserys, shaped by exile but not consumed by bitterness, looks at Daenerys and sees not a pawn but a partner. From the earliest days in Illyrio's manse in Pentos, he involves her in strategy. He speaks to her not in shouts, but in shared stories of their family. He tells her not only of Rhaegar's strength, but of their mother's kindness. Not only of dragons and fire, but of peace and the dream of rebuilding. He offers her not commands, but choices. They spend hours reading the histories of House Targaryen together, learning from Aegon's conquest, from the dance of the dragons, from the madness of their father. They debate, argue, think. She questions his certainty, and he listens. When he feels the old anger rising, he walks away instead of lashing out. Slowly, trust replaces fear. Daenerys no longer flinches. Viserys no longer sneers. They laugh again, two children forged in exile, but bound by blood. Viserys begins to see the world through Daenerys' eyes, softer, more curious. She observes people in ways he never did. She notices the servants, the slaves, the ones who move silently through the shadows. She teaches him how to read the room, not just the books. He, in turn, teaches her the lineage of the noble houses, the intricacies of Westerosi politics, the value of perception and poise. They are no longer prince and girl, they are two halves of the last dragon. When Illyrio suggests the marriage to Khal Drogo, Viserys does not force her into it. Instead, they sit by candlelight and discuss the proposal. He lays out the political value, the risks, the rewards. She considers it not as a child manipulated, but as a future queen weighing the fate of their house. She agrees only because she chooses to. And when the wedding comes, Viserys walks her down the aisle not as her master, but as her brother. After the marriage, Viserys does not distance himself in bitterness. He integrates himself into the Khalasar's social structure. He shows humility to Drogo. He praises Daenerys' grace. Her growing influence becomes their shared strength. She becomes the voice of empathy, he the voice of strategy. When the Dothraki ride, she rides beside the Khal, and Viserys rides with her blood riders. The Targaryens are seen as a pair, one to admire, one to follow. Their different strengths create a balance. Daenerys listens to the people. Viserys builds alliances. She speaks of liberation. He designs the campaign to make it real. She dreams of dragons. He maps the kingdoms they'll return to. He never tries to outshine her, but he learns how to lead behind the scenes. When she doubts herself, he reminds her of who she is. When he falters, she holds him steady. When Daenerys begins to dream of fire and wings, Viserys doesn't mock her. He listens. He takes it seriously. He helps her gather the dragon eggs, protect them, study them. They speak with priests, with fire worshippers, with mages. They begin to believe together not in madness, but in miracle. And when the dragons finally hatch, it is not the end of Viserys, it is the beginning of something greater. He sees that she is the one who carries the flame, but he is the one who shields it from the wind. She is the dragon in the sky. He is the shadow on the battlefield. Where she inspires, he prepares. When she stands before armies and speaks of freedom, he rides ahead and secures grain, ships, and routes. She breaks chains. He builds the systems to keep them off forever. Together, they reshape the image of House Targaryen. They are no longer a story of madness and fire. They are a story of rebirth and unity. When they conquer cities, they do so with precision. Daenerys leads the people. Viserys negotiates with the nobility. When the Unsullied are freed, he organizes their ranks into disciplined legions. When Daenerys liberates Meereen, Viserys drafts a governing charter, working with scholars and freedmen to create a council that lasts. In time, the world knows them as a pair. She is the mother of dragons. He is the prince of strategy. The armies march not under one name, but two. And when they look across the narrow sea to Westeros, they do not see a throne to take, they see a home to heal. When they finally land on Westerosi shores, it is not a foreign invasion, it is a return. House Martell receives them first, honoring their Targaryen blood. Houses in the Reach and the Stormlands begin to declare for them, not because of fear, but because of faith. Lords hear of the silver-haired queen who freed cities, and her brother who built them to last. Viserys walks into the dragon pit not as a man twisted by resentment, but as a calm, intelligent tactician who overcame his past. Daenerys walks beside him, radiant, fierce, and just. Together, they demand no crown, they earn it. They bring dragons, yes, but also diplomacy. They bring fire, but also vision. Their bond, once frayed and fragile, becomes the heart of the Targaryen restoration. In this world, Viserys never loses himself to ego, and because of that, he never loses his sister. Together, they are what the realm needed. Fire and wisdom, heart and mind, dragon and flame, brother and sister. Viserys Targaryen dreamed of returning to Westeros in a blaze of glory, marching through King's Landing with dragons overhead and enemies kneeling in chains. But dreams without discipline burn themselves out. In the timeline that unfolded, He died far from the throne, he claimed. Yet another story was possible, a story of patience, timing, and precise, ruthless planning. In this version, Viserys does not let emotions steer his path. Instead of demanding a crown before earning a sword, he builds quietly an exiled prince turned strategist. After forming strong alliances in Essos with Illyrio Mopatis' gold, the backing of powerful merchant princes, and the allegiance of key sellsword companies, Viserys spends years laying the groundwork. He does not launch a hasty campaign across the sea. He studies Westeros from afar. He monitors its weaknesses. And, crucially, he waits for the realm to turn on itself. The first real opportunity comes in the form of political decay. King Robert Baratheon's rule, though initially popular, begins to falter. The crown bleeds gold. The small council is fractured by personal ambition. The king's hunts grow longer, his judgment more erratic. The court is ruled more by manipulation than monarchy. Discontent simmers in the Reach and the Stormlands, and the north grows increasingly isolated. Viserys watches and listens. Then, the Greyjoy rebellion erupts. Balon Greyjoy declares himself king of the Iron Islands, and Pike rises in open defiance of the Iron Throne. Robert and his forces respond swiftly, but the cracks in the realm are revealed. The crown's reliance on southern troops, the vulnerability of coastal defenses, the arrogance of the nobility. Viserys recognizes this not just as a rebellion, but as a distraction. He knows that Westeros cannot fight two wars at once. This is when Viserys begins phase 1 of his return. He sends envoys to the scattered Blackfyre loyalists still hiding in the free cities. He uses their name to rally Targaryen sympathizers under a new banner, one of unity, not vengeance. He opens negotiations with the Golden Company, offering them what they've always wanted, a return to Westeros, this time not as exiles, but as conquerors with a legitimate Targaryen heir. Simultaneously, he cultivates his relationship with Khal Drogo and the Dothraki. By this point, he has become more than tolerated among the horse lords. He is respected, a brother to their Khaleesi, a warrior in his own right, a man who has shed the weaknesses of court life. He proposes not a war of annihilation, but a campaign of speed and shock. Land, strike quickly, and take the crown before the realm can react. To make this viable, he first establishes safe landing points. Illyrio arranges deals with pirate fleets and port officials in the Stepstones and the disputed lands. Supplies are stockpiled in hidden coves. Ships are retrofitted to carry horses across the narrow sea. Viserys coordinates with his agents in Westeros, exiled lords, old Targaryen loyalists, minor houses like House Morrigan, House Staunton, and even some disgruntled Stormlords. These lords agree to rise if a viable claimant appears. As Robert's forces focus on crushing the Ironborn, Viserys strikes. Phase 2 begins with a surprise landing in the Stormlands, targeting lightly defended castles along the southern coast. The Dothraki, having never faced Westerosi cavalry, overwhelm the local defenders with speed and ferocity. The Golden Company secures strongholds further inland, offering protection to small folk and enforcing discipline among their troops. This is not a horde of chaos, it's a professional invasion with a plan. Viserys sets up a temporary court in Tarth, the Sapphire Isle. Its lords bend the knee, and the port becomes a central supply hub. From there, he sends ravens not demanding allegiance, but promising order. He frames his campaign not as revenge for Robert's rebellion, but as a correction of its consequences. A realm governed by drunken neglect, a crown drowning in debt, and a people without justice. He speaks not of fire and blood, but of restoration. Meanwhile, Daenerys begins sending emissaries to Dorne. The Martells, still bitter over Elya's murder and disillusioned with the Baratheon regime, agree to secret meetings. They do not yet declare open support, but they begin to quietly assist, providing scouts, couriers, and access through the Red Mountains. Viserys keeps momentum by moving north swiftly. He avoids King's Landing for now, recognizing that the Lannisters will not move without cause. Instead, he pushes through the Reach, where House Tyrell watches warily. He makes overtures to Lord Mace, offering betrothal alliances and shared governance. The Tyrells hesitate, but they do not resist. As Robert returns from the Iron Islands, exhausted and wary of further war, he receives the news. Viserys Targaryen has returned. He commands a Dothraki army, is backed by the Golden Company, and has already taken half a dozen castles. Commoners cheer for him. Southern lords question their loyalty. The realm, already shaken, begins to unravel. The crown cannot respond swiftly. The Royal Navy is still recovering from losses at Pike. Lannister forces remain tied to the Westerlands. Robert sends envoys demanding surrender. Viserys replies with an offer: abdicate peacefully, and he will spare the realm another war. Robert refuses, but the realm is now divided. Phase 3 begins. Destabilization of the capital. Viserys' agents in King's Landing, merchants, servants, and former loyalists, begin spreading rumors. They speak of Robert's illegitimate children, of Lannister manipulation, of Viserys as the true son of Westeros, tempered by exile. Gold flows from Illyrio's hidden accounts, funding bribes and subversions within the city walls. At the same time, Viserys captures major grain stores and withholds shipments to the capital. Riots begin. The city watch is stretched thin. Lord Varys, always watching, begins to hedge his loyalties. Littlefinger smells opportunity and begins sending contradictory letters to both sides, playing his long game. With unrest growing, Viserys calls a council of war. There, Daenerys proposes they strike King's Landing before Tywin Lannister can reinforce it. Viserys agrees, but with restraint. They will avoid the sack of King's Landing that doomed his father. Instead, they will surround it, cut off all supplies, and call for surrender. He offers pardons to those who lay down arms. His reputation as a calculating, disciplined commander strengthens. When the final siege begins, the people of the city, already starving, open the gates. The gold cloaks, swayed by bribes and exhausted by chaos, defect. Viserys enters the capital not in flames, but to cheering crowds, many of whom see in him not the Mad King's son, but the hope of a better future. Robert Baratheon flees west, gathering loyalists, but his support erodes. The realm wants peace. The Stormlands defect. The Riverlands stay neutral. Dorne quietly celebrates. And the North, ever cautious, sends envoys to assess this new king. Viserys takes the Iron Throne not as a usurper, but as a tactician who waited for the right moment, built the right coalition, and struck when the realm was ready to listen. There is no wildfire, no Red Keep in ruin, no dragons scorching the innocent. Only a return, precise, planned, complete. And this time, the last dragon wears a crown he truly earned. Viserys Targaryen believed the Iron Throne was his by birthright, something owed, not earned. But birthright alone had never been enough. Even Aegon the Conqueror, with dragons at his side, forged alliances through marriage and diplomacy. In his desperation, Viserys overlooked one of the most potent tools of power available to him: marriage as strategy, not transaction. What if, instead of selling Daenerys to Khal Drogo as a means to raise an army, Viserys had considered marriage himself, not just to fulfill personal ambition, but to forge a political alliance that would legitimize his claim and provide a real base of support? A wedding band, carefully chosen, could have been more powerful than a sword. Viserys, in this scenario, studies not just Westeros, but the political landscape of Essos. He understands that power doesn't always come from the battlefield. It comes from names whispered in courtrooms, from bloodlines united in ink and ceremony. With this mindset, he begins a deliberate search, not for a beautiful bride, but for a queen with leverage. His first step is to look toward exiled Westerosi nobility. There were lords and ladies who had fought for House Targaryen during Robert's rebellion and fled when the cause fell. Some hid in Braavos, Lys, or Tirash. Others had married into Essosi merchant houses to survive. One such family might have included a daughter of noble blood, with knowledge of Westerosi politics, kin still secretly loyal to the old regime, and a deep personal desire to see the dragons return. Viserys begins quietly reaching out to these exiled houses, offering audience, friendship, and the possibility of shared restoration. A marriage to the daughter of a noble house like House Velaryon or Blackmont families with Targaryen ties or Dornish grudges would not just give Viserys credibility, it would give him access to dormant alliances. With the right match, he gains not just a wife, but an emissary to the disillusioned lords still scattered across the Seven Kingdoms. He does not stop at the west. In Essos, powerful noble houses govern cities and regions with armies of their own. In Volantis, the ruling Triarch families carry ancient Valyrian blood, much like the Targaryens. In Lys, the noble families pride themselves on their beauty and bloodlines. In Qarth, merchant princes rule with extravagance and hidden influence. A marriage to the daughter of a powerful Triarch of Volantis, for example, would grant Viserys a claim of unity between the last Valyrian dynasty and one of the oldest free cities of Valyria's legacy. Such a union would serve multiple purposes. Legitimacy, Valyrian heritage, and noble status bolster his royal claim. Funding, the bride's family provides ships, troops, or coin to support his return. Trade access, ports, fleets, and economic leverage are opened. Diplomatic shield, his position in Essos becomes secured. He's no longer just a wandering prince, but kin to established power. In this alternate path, Viserys hosts suitors not as a desperate exile, but as a future king. He appears at feasts, not in rags, but robed in dignity. Illyrio Mopatis, seeing Viserys embrace diplomacy over tantrum, invests even more in his future. He arranges quiet meetings, shares intelligence, and positions Viserys as a man of potential, not merely descent. The marriage process becomes an event in itself. Noble families begin to send envoys. He selects a bride carefully, someone intelligent, politically skilled, and connected. Perhaps it's Nyra Velaryon, granddaughter of a Westerosi lord now living in Lys, raised among naval captains and steeped in old loyalty. Or perhaps it's Serra Triarchus of Volantis, a sharp-minded daughter of a ruling house with ties to the Red Temple and its zealous followers. The wedding is held in grand fashion, not in a dusty Dothraki tent, but in a marble hall in Pentos or Myr. Nobles from across Essos attend. Coins flow. Pledges are made. A new banner is unfurled, Viserys Targaryen, not just a prince, but a husband, a political actor, and a contender worthy of attention. The union becomes a rallying point. Disaffected Essosi captains, once unwilling to bet on an unstable claimant, now reconsider. They see Viserys not as a madman in exile, but as a royal who has found footing. Westerosi exiles whisper about his growing influence. Sellsword companies approach him not for a quick paycheck, but for a long-term campaign. The Golden Company, sworn enemies of the Baratheon line, send feelers through their Lysene contacts. From there, the strategy unfolds. With his bride's family funding part of the campaign, Viserys begins slowly acquiring ships, not in a grand, reckless expedition, but methodically. Trade routes are opened, officers are hired, ports are secured. With his wife's connections in the free cities, he gains protection from rival magisters and espionage from hired eyes. Each alliance deepens. Each month brings more whispers of the Targaryen prince who has transformed himself. Daenerys, too, thrives in this world. No longer sold like cattle, she is consulted. She works with her sister-in-law, learning how court diplomacy functions in Lys or Volantis. She is not a ghost in her brother's shadow, but his right hand. Their relationship flourishes, founded in mutual respect. Viserys, with a wife and advisors at his side, begins to resemble the early reign of Aegon the Conqueror, building rather than burning. When word reaches Essos of Westeros's instability, Robert's growing debt, political tension with the Lannisters, the unrest after the Greyjoy rebellion, Viserys does not act impulsively. He sends emissaries ahead. His wife sends letters to her noble cousins now living in Westeros. They begin to test the waters, identifying which lords are disillusioned with Robert's rule. And when the moment comes when the Seven Kingdoms are fractured and the small folk whisper of dragons returning, Viserys lands not with an army of horsemen, but with a wife from nobility, ships under his command, and a coalition behind him. He is no longer a stranger to Westeros. He is a known force. The lords of the Stormlands and Dorne, seeing his alliances, begin to lean toward him. House Velaryon, if bound to him by marriage, opens Blackwater Bay. The Reach, tired of southern chaos, considers peace under a dragon once more. The North remains cautious but curious. In the Red Keep, Varys hears of Viserys' return and realizes that this is not the erratic boy who once screamed for a crown. This is a king with a court, with a wife, with purpose. And so, without a single battle, Viserys walks into Westeros not with a war horn but with a wedding ring. Imagine a different Westeros, not one ruled by Robert Baratheon, drunken and drowning in debt, nor one reshaped by Daenerys and her dragons, but one reclaimed by Viserys Targaryen, the boy who fled the Red Keep with nothing but his name and his rage, who crossed seas and deserts in search of a throne he'd never sat on, finally sits where his father died. But what kind of king would Viserys have become? The truth is, it depends entirely on which version of Viserys returns. If the original Viserys, the one warped by years of entitlement, humiliation, and unchecked pride, were to seize power, Westeros would not have found peace. It would have traded one chaos for another. He may have worn the crown with triumphant pride, but behind the closed doors of the Red Keep, he would have ruled through fear, paranoia, and volatile emotion. The throne would be his because it was his birthright, not because he had a vision for the realm. He would fill the small council with sycophants and opportunists, rewarding loyalty over competence. Advisors like Varys might keep him in check temporarily, but even the spider would know that madness, when dressed in royal silks, cannot be contained forever. Public executions would become common, especially for anyone who served Robert. Lords who once knelt to the Baratheons would face trial or be encouraged to bend the knee with sword at their backs. Lannisters? Extinguished. Tyrells? Watched. Stark influence would fade, their northern autonomy increasingly threatened by a king obsessed with absolute control. If Daenerys stood beside him, she might try to soften him, but Viserys, in this darker future, sees even her as a potential threat. Her dragons, her charisma, her following dangerous in the eyes of a ruler who wants all love, all loyalty, and none of the competition. He might exile her, lock her away, or worse. Their sibling bond, once strong in exile, would rot beneath the pressure of a crown. Eventually, Viserys might become more than a tyrant. He could become something far worse, a ruler just competent enough to maintain control, but too unstable to bring progress. A man who taxes the realm into ruin for vanity projects, who tries to rebuild the Targaryen dynasty not through reform, but through fear and forced marriages. A man whose temper poisons every negotiation. And perhaps, in time, the whispers begin again. Another rebellion, another war. But now imagine the other Viserys, the one he could have been. The Viserys who listened, who learned, who formed alliances with tact, not tantrums. The one who stood beside Daenerys as a partner, not a master. This Viserys is not the boy we knew, but a man forged in exile, tempered by loss, and taught by failure. He would begin his reign not with executions, but with reconciliation. He would hold public forums, issue pardons to minor lords, and declare amnesty to small folk who fought for Robert. He would position himself not as a vengeful son, but as a restorer of order. His message would be simple: I have returned not to burn the realm, but to fix it. He would surround himself with intelligent, loyal advisors, scholars from Essos, seasoned captains from the Golden Company, and perhaps even the reformed remnants of Varys' network. If married into a noble house, his queen would act as a diplomatic bridge, healing old wounds. Daenerys, with or without dragons, would lead social reforms, freeing debtors, improving cities, and advocating for women and the poor. Their reign would be a blend of steel and mercy. This Viserys would modernize the realm. He might tax the rich to fund reconstruction, build roads between fractured regions, and create a new royal navy to ensure Essos-Westeros trade. He would, however, rule with a cold edge. While not a tyrant, he would be no soft idealist. Betrayal would be met with swift punishment. He would suppress the faith militant if they challenged his rule. and he'd keep a wary eye on northern independence movements. In foreign policy, he would be bold. He might annex the Stepstones, establish new trade colonies along Slaver's Bay, or even declare himself protector of Valyrian heritage, inviting scholars and mages to Dragonstone to rekindle the ancient arts. Magic, science, and strategy would all find their place at his court. But even in this enlightened vision, Viserys would remain haunted by the memory of his father's madness, by the humiliation he endured, by the knowledge that his sister was always more loved. He would work tirelessly, not out of altruism, but out of a need to prove himself. His reign would not be warm, but it would be effective, cold, sharp, focused. A kingdom built not on joy, but on structure. And yet, perhaps that's what Westeros would have needed. A man who rose from the ashes of exile and madness, not untouched by trauma, but driven by it. A king who could not forget, but who refused to repeat. A ruler who never quite smiled, but who never again screamed. In the end, Westeros under Viserys could have become one of two legends. A shattered realm, ruled by another Targaryen tyrant, remembered as a cautionary tale worse than the Mad King himself. Or a sharp-edged kingdom of discipline and rebirth governed not by love, but by force-held balance. A realm that survived because its king refused to lose again. Either way, Viserys Targaryen would not be forgotten.